The title to this video is not a typo. I am very excited to reveal that F1 Manager 23 will have team switching during save games in September. Now, yes, I know it's not coming for release. I'm a little bit bummed out about that, but still, it was a big community ask, and Frontier are delivering on it. Last week, I was fortunate to be one of the first people in the world outside of Frontier to give the new F1 Manager a go, both with a scenario, which was the Monaco Grand Prix, managing the Aston Martin pit wall as the heavens opened in the Principality. Following on from that, I was dumped into a career mode ahead of the Silverstone Grand Prix, managing Mercedes. Over the course of a 90-minute session, I was given a chance to get hands-on with the game, try out some of the new features, and today, I want to talk about them. What's new in the game, what I noticed as someone who enjoyed the last game, but felt like it did lack replayability. Of course, this comes with the caveat, I played 90 minutes of the game in a controlled environment. The game is not out, of course, until the end of July. That said, if you want my overwhelming opinion leaving the game and the play session, I was more excited than when I went in. Anyway, before I show more of the exclusive gameplay footage I was able to capture during the event, and we talk all about what I liked and what I enjoyed from my time playing the game, let's run the intro. We need to get the branding out the way, otherwise Editing Jack gets grumpy with me. Right, Editing Jack intro, put it in here. I'll see you in a mo. Now, given the fact that it is a bit of a headline feature and perhaps something we should acknowledge as a thing, even if it doesn't excite me massively, race replays, race scenarios, 2 new ways to play F1 Manager 23. Of course, last year you were stuck with career mode as the sole and only option and way to play. A game mode that takes a lot of commitment. There was no mid-session saving, so you couldn't save a race midway through. That is changing this year. You will be able to save your game, so if you've only got half an hour to play, you can just play for half an hour, which it's mental that wasn't in last year, really. As for race scenarios, these are a curated list of different challenges, race by race, that replicate real-world scenarios from the real Grand Prix going on during the 2023 season. And as I mentioned, the one you can see on screen right now is mine with Aston Martin as the heavens opened, and Alonso, well, if you watch the race, you know what happened. He pitted for dry tyres as it started to rain, and then pitted again very promptly for the Inter tyres. Now, first things first, I don't feel like this mode is for me. I'm not going to have a load of replayability with it, but for more casual players, people who don't maybe have a load of time to dedicate to the game, I actually see this as a pretty cool option. We've all had that friend. You've probably done it yourself. You're watching Formula 1 on the TV and you think, well, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done this thing differently. I feel like this mode is going to allow you to do that with these race scenarios. Now, I do have question marks over the replayability. In the example you can see here, I was enjoying looking at the pretty graphics and all the new stuff too much that I kind of forgot to pit Alonso the lap that I probably should have pitted him. And as he went down the start-finish straight, I realised I'd made an error. Now, as a result of that, I couldn't catch Verstappen. Verstappen pitted, he was a few seconds ahead of us for the rest of the race, and instead it became my sole mission to get Lance Stroll ahead of Valtteri Bottas. Yeah, I distracted myself with a side quest. Did I succeed? No, I didn't. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there is going to be some kind of scoring system where you can compare your results against friends. Obviously, in this situation where I missed the chance to pit, had I not been in this situation where I was obviously capturing footage, playing in a capture session, I would have just loaded up the scenario again and pitted sooner. And I suppose therein lies a minor issue with these kind of scenarios. I feel like once you've done them once or twice, you're going to know what you need to do. And so, yeah, they're not going to have a load of replayability, but at the same time, as something a little bit different, I'm all on board for them. Now, as well as race moments that recreate real-world scenarios mid-race, there is also going to be race replays, where you start with the starting grid of the weekend. It's not clear exactly how this is going to work, how soon they will appear, but say you watch the Singapore Grand Prix at the weekend, during the week afterwards, you should theoretically be able to load up the starting grid that started the race on the Sunday, take over any team, and try and do better than they did in real life. I don't want you to mistake the fact I'm lukewarm on this feature as being necessarily a negative. Ultimately, if you're watching these videos about the game on YouTube, you are a hardcore player. You are probably more than likely the person who's here for career mode. Speaking of which, let's talk about the big things, the meat and potatoes, because there's lots of stuff here to actually cover. Now, let's make no mistake. Last year's biggest issue with F1 Manager 22 was longevity. Driver development was a bit meh. Part development was relatively straightforward. Once you figured out how all the systems worked, well, you could win the World Championship as Williams in like 2 or 3 seasons. There wasn't a lot of challenge there. Obviously, I had 90 minutes to play. Didn't win a Drivers' Championship or a Constructors' Championship, so I can't comment on those things specifically. But in terms of what I could observe, there's lots of reasons for excitement. First things first, driver development is changing this year, which I'm hoping is going to see us see bigger variety in terms of drivers coming onto the grid from, of course, F2 and F3, which are fully simulated. Last year, people figured out rather quickly that braking was the stat that your drivers needed to have. So everyone just put all the development points into, well, braking. This year, the system is kind of a little bit different. Yes, you can focus on certain areas for drivers to develop in, but it's no longer a point system where you kind of load up your driver's stats and just, increase whatever you fancy like an RPG. Instead, you have general focuses and the development is left a lot more up to the driver. You can't just min-max everything. Coming from Football Manager, I think this is a massive plus. I like the idea that there is more outside of your control, and whilst you can loosely dictate things, it's not as simple as clicking a button and stat goes up. This is also the exact same system that staff use as well, so staff you can now develop in a very similar way. The overall development model of drivers has changed, which should see a lot of drivers decline as they get older. I'm still hoping we will have the odd exception to the rule. Drivers like Alonso, Hamilton, who just feel like they're never going to retire at this rate. They could be like 60 years old and still playing in my F1 Manager 23 save. But of course, with older drivers getting worse, you are going to need drivers to come up. And as I already mentioned, Formula 2, Formula 3 are now simulated in the game. Now, I decided rather than rushing straight to the Silverstone Grand Prix to have a look at how these championships are simulated in the Mercedes save game I was given, and I was really pleasantly surprised. You had all the results for all the different weekends in the F2 and F3 calendar. You could see fastest laps, sprint race results for F2, the full main race results for F2, and yes, it's not quite as detailed as it could be, but I look at this as a really, really good foundation, and it does allow me to get wildly over-speculative and excited about the fact that maybe in a year or two's time, we could be managing these championships as well. Whilst we're on the topic of drivers and staff, we have to talk about it. New contract system. Yes, no longer do you have to wait until the end of the season to start making moves. Instead, you can plan ahead. You can sign drivers on deals that will kick in at the start of the following season, and you can actually do the same with staff members. So, if you're in a situation where you have a legacy driver, someone who's been around a while, has a really good relationship with an engineer, but maybe the engineer isn't so good, and they're both having their contracts expire at the same time, in the early summer period, you can get planning ahead for the coming season. This also means if you're like me and Mick Schumacher is your nemesis, you can go and find Teo Pacher potentially winning the F2 Championship at the time of, well, mid-season kicking in, and sign him as the reserve driver for next season. Yeah, I did make a point to do that during my brief hands-on period. Another area of the game that definitely impacted the challenge of the game last year was car development. Like I said, once you figured out, it was rather simple, but this year, there are some changes to the system. How big an impact they're going to have, we can only speculate at the moment. I am desperately hoping that the old system, everything that already existed, has been refined slightly, and combined with the new durability stat for parts, it's really going to spice up the game. It's going to add challenge, it's going to add longevity. So when you develop a part, there is a new attribute to consider, that is durability. That basically dictates the minimum lifespan of the part. Note the minimum. You can run it longer than it's meant to be run for, but it could fail. I wasn't actually able to fully work out how durability impacts the part design and manufacturing stages. Do you have to design a part longer to get better durability? Does a part have to have less performance to get better durability? I look forward to finding out more about that soon. But ultimately, in having parts that have lifespans, we should see failures in races more random retirements. How annoying was it last year where no one really retired due to engine or just general issues? Cars just drove forever until they did the little spinny outs or shunted into each other. So that in itself excites me a little bit for the potential that that could bring. On top of that, of course, you as a manager and a team principal are going to have a dilemma sometimes. You might have a really good part and not have backups of it. Do you stick with the really good part even if it's gone way beyond its minimum lifespan but the performance gains are worth it? Or do you take the safer approach, use the part that has better durability, that's going to be something that, I don't know, it adds a new dynamic to the game. Of course, this year there is now the Sporting Director staff member. This is a brand new staff member role that is going to impact pit stops and, well, your pit crew, which is another area of the game that has seen some changes this year. If you're going into it expecting it to have the same level of detail as training in Football Manager, for example, you will be disappointed, but ultimately it is a whole new bit of the game to manage in terms of pit stop schedules, the AM and PM slots you can change. You can just stick to presets if you want to be, as hands-off as can be. But for those of you that want the little minutiae, I think you're going to have fun with this. I didn't get a chance to see it myself, but pit stop errors are now a thing. If you fatigue your staff training them too hard, you don't rest them enough, you could have errors during races. And all of a sudden, what last year was a really safe double stack because mistakes didn't happen, has jeopardy in F1 Manager 23. I'm not going to feel safe doing the double stack till the first car pulls out, and that in itself is a whole new dynamic to the gameplay to consider. Pit stop times are tracked during races, so you will be able to see how your pit crew do versus the other teams in the championships. Across the season, you can see which team's been doing the best, how's your squad doing, do you need to put a bit more money into it? Okay, let's talk about races. Now, I have to tell you now, I didn't get to finish the Silverstone race that you've seen going on in the background, but it was quite a dramatic one for me. There was a weird qualifying session, and I feel like I should acknowledge this. In Q3, there was rain at the end of the session, so I put on my last set of fresh softs at the start of the Q3 session to get a lap in before the heavens opened. The AI, being the F1 Manager AI, used old softs, saving some softs for later on in that session for their final runs, which of course were when it rained. So as a result of that, I did get first and third on the grid, which that did make me sigh a little bit, because ultimately the AI should know, hey, it's going to rain at the end of Q3, maybe we should use our fresh softs now while it's still dry. That said, of course, this is development in progress. I'd like to think when the developers see these kind of issues, they are able to look at them, try and figure out how they can fix them going forward. Fundamentally, the AI in this game and last year's game did get better as the year went on. Theoretically, it should never get worse. Fingers crossed. There was a briefing period before we were able to play the game as part of this press event. Worth noting that in that, Frontier mentioned the fact that lap to lap, the teams will make decisions regarding their drivers. Of course, with this qualifying example, there's not lap to lap to be able to make that decision. But I did notice in the Monaco Grand Prix, a few teams did try and go onto wets rather than inters due to perhaps uncertainty in weather, expecting it to rain more, or just because they thought it was the right tyre to be on. Whilst it was a bit of a disappointment to see what I saw in the qualifying session, I'm still holding out hope they will be able to fix that. It's not all bad news though when it comes to tyres in F1 Manager. That's a weird segue. Yes, there are some big positives, and the first one is, I think, tyre temperatures are going to matter this year. Certainly last season, I was guilty of just pushing my drivers faster and faster and faster. This time around, in 2 races, the tyre temperature scared me. I noticed it more. It was easier to work out what temperature I needed to get them up to. I felt a need when I pitted drivers to push them faster on an outlap to try and get temperature into the tyres quicker. And equally, when following cars for an extended period of time, I did actually have to tell the drivers to drive in clean air. Can you remember that option? Did anyone use that option last season? You'll be using it a bit more now, I think. Now, the reason I say all of this is because of what happened to me in the Silverstone Grand Prix with George Russell. So going into this race, Russell's power unit was a little on the fritz anyway and struggling a little bit, and he was starting in third with Hamilton starting in first. So I thought I'd make it George Russell's mission to hold up the drivers behind him to try and get Hamilton the win. That was the plan. And to be fair, it did work for a little bit. Hamilton pitted, came out with Perez. They were kind of net P1, P2 with a few drivers yet to stop. George Russell, though, in holding up drivers and driving a bit slow, his driver confidence had been creeping down through the start of this race. Now, driver confidence is a new dynamic to the game. It's kind of weird that last year in F1 Manager, there was nothing that really dictated driver form. Obviously, you had track acclimatization and I think car part familiarity, and those were kind of 2 things. But driver confidence is something that is a lot more reactionary, and it will change during a race. So it's lap 16, George Russell will be pitting at the end of the lap, and with 45% wear on his tyres, I decide we'll push him. 1 last lap, full speed, you can go, burn up what's left of the tyres. And then he spun out. Now, just on the topic of the spinning out, the animation doesn't look that different to last year, but one thing I did notice is he got back on the road a lot quicker. He didn't kind of park up and wait for half an hour. When there was a gap in the traffic, he did get going again. Now, when George spun, I felt like that was my responsibility. I told him to push. He was using used softs, so their temperature was on the higher side, if not overheating yet. So when he pitted, I felt like we should just push. We should just go for it. But his confidence was low, and a few laps later, he crashed into Ocon. And suddenly, I felt like this chain reaction had happened, all because I decided to push like I would have last year in F1 Manager on a used set of softs. Not only we'd spun out, but having pitted, we'd now broken our nose, and, well, we needed to pit again. Of course, it's impossible to quantify how much of an effect the driver confidence and the tyre temperature systems have had on this situation and how it played out, but it was really refreshing to see something that I hadn't seen in all my hours playing last year's F1 Manager. And I did feel directly responsible. I felt like everything could have been avoided had I been more sensible. I did also notice that having pitted for hard tyres and changing the nose and planning on going long and conserving tyres, it was really, really hard to get temperature into the hard tyres versus the mediums and the softs. And as a result, George wasn't very quick. In fact, as my 90-minute play session came to a close, George Russell was last, Hamilton was second. Crazy how two people in the exact same car with the exact same team principal could have such different races. Anyway, that is a rundown of my experience playing F1 Manager 23 for the first time. The stuff that I noticed that I really liked, the stuff I was less sure on. Hopefully this video has shown you some stuff you weren't already aware was in the game or a change this year. Fundamentally, it's not a revolution. This game is very much an evolution on last year's game. If you enjoyed last year's game, you're going to enjoy it more. If you're someone who felt like the game lacked in detail last year, whilst there has been more of that, there may not be quite enough to satisfy your demand. The difference in performance between tyres massively changed over the course of many patches in F1 Manager 22. It made the game more difficult, it made the game funner, and I'm hoping that with the new driver confidence system, hopefully tyre temperature mattering more, and an overhaul to the car development system, finally career mode will have that little bit more longevity, and perhaps most importantly, a little bit more of a challenge. In terms of my content plans for F1 Manager 23, we will have more details on that soon, but I will be almost certainly streaming it on Twitch towards the end of next month. So if you want to find out more, subscribe to this YouTube channel, head on over to my Twitch channel, which is the exact same username. And much like last year, I hope there'll be a few thousand of you watching me shout at Mick Schumacher in anger, and Kevin Magnussen in anger, and just every driver in anger. This game just makes me angry. Please do drop a like on the video. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking of the game. If you are looking to pre-order F1 Manager, I have partnered with Fanatical. There is a link at the top of the description as well as in the comments. Over there, you can pick up the game on the PC platform for 18% cheaper than on Steam. That code will exist after the pre-order period is over, so don't feel like you have to pick it up right now. If you want to wait for reviews, I completely understand. Besides that, I hope this video helped you out. I hope it gave you a bit more of a deep dive into F1 Manager 23 with my first-hand experience, and who knows, maybe I'll get a chance to get some more hands-on before the game officially hits stores towards the end of July. If you've gone to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching to the end. Massively appreciated. Glad you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys all again on a new one very, very soon. Until then, it's me, Jack, and I'll talk to you all in a bit. I'm out.